What is the soul? Look for it, and it can't be seen. Define it, and it will elude description. And yet, for the ancients, the idea that life could exist without a soul was unimaginable. However, ancient texts such as the Talmud and Kabbalistic rabbis did not make a strict distinction between body and soul. Unlike Plato, for example, most Jewish thinkers had a notion of life energy that was quasi-materialistic. The spiritual world and the material world were interwoven, and actions in one could directly affect the other, for better or for worse. But what happens when the life energies are misappropriated? What happens when something goes wrong? There seem to be objects in this world that draw to themselves some sort of mysterious, dark energy. For whatever reasons, unexplained forces, spirits, entities, or curses are said to gravitate towards these items, imbuing them with some ominous quality beyond our ability to explain or even comprehend. One such baffling object turned up for sale on the internet and immediately stirred the imagination with its story of spectral entities, curses, and strange happenings orbiting it, and it has gone on to catapult into one of the strangest haunted object tales of recent times. This is the story of what has come to be known as the Dybbuk Box. The Dybbuk Box is an old, antique wine cabinet steeped in a shadowy past, discovered and purchased at an estate sale by antiques collector Kevin Mannis. Although the box had certainly caught his eye, it was the spooky and unique history told to Mannis by the seller that really made him interested. The seller claimed that the box had been owned by her grandmother, a Jewish Holocaust survivor in World War II. The grandmother was the only one of the family to survive the atrocity, and with some other Holocaust survivors, managed to escape and make her way to Spain, which was where she had acquired the box. When she had immigrated to the United States, the grandmother brought the box with her and had warned her daughter to never open it, as it was claimed that it held within it a type of ancient demon called a Dybbuk, one that had been accidentally summoned and subsequently imprisoned within the box long ago. Intrigued by its sinister history, Mannis purchased the box and would soon realize that there was perhaps more to the ominous and creepy legend than he could have ever imagined. After returning home, Mannis immediately broke the rule not to open the cabinet and found that it contained an eclectic mix of odd items, including a wine goblet, a small granite slab with the Hebrew word shalom etched into it, a dried rosebud, a candlestick, 2 pennies from the 1920s, and perhaps strangest of all, 2 locks of human hair bound by cords. Almost immediately after this, on that very same day, strange things began to happen. Beginning with an incident when Mannis left his shop to go on an errand and returned to find the place was ransacked, as if someone had thrown a tantrum there, yet nothing had been stolen. A terrified clerk at the shop also said that she had seen light bulbs smashing by themselves and had heard what sounded like a disembodied voice cursing. Oddly, an isolated patch of the area seemed to be infused with the scent of jasmine flowers. Mannis would say of the incident, "When I got back to the shop, I went to investigate. I remember heading toward the back and walking into what I can only describe as a wall of scent. It smelled just like jasmine flowers. You could take one step and not smell a thing, and take another step backward and be surrounded by it again. Manus then gave the box to his mother as a present on Halloween, still not really connecting the strange occurrences with it, and she allegedly suffered a stroke a mere 5 minutes after receiving it. She survived the incident, which partially blinded her, but not surprisingly, didn't want the box anymore, saying she could feel a malevolence emanating from it. He then gave it to his sister, but she too soon complained that there was some inexplicable feeling of dread any time she was near it. She said that it would open on its own when no one else was around. She also spoke of having potent nightmares of a scary old lady, and so she soon gave the box back, only after a few days of having it. The box passed to his brother, his wife, the wife claiming she smelled cat urine, the brother smelling hints of jasmine, and even eventually to Manus's girlfriend. They all complained that there was something evil about it. Manus finally decided to hold on to it for the time being and put it in his basement. That evening, Manus experienced what he called some of the most insane nightmares he had ever experienced. I found myself walking with a friend, usually someone I know well and trust. At some point in the dream, I would look over into the eyes of the person that I'm with. It's then that I realized that there's something different, something evil looking back at me. In that point in my dream, the person I'm with changes into what can only be described as the most gruesome, demonic-looking hag that I have ever seen. This hag proceeds then to beat the living tar out of me. He would awaken from these dreams and find scratches, bite marks, and even bruises on his body. These nightmares persisted for several weeks. Even friends or family that stayed at his house during this time complained of having similar terrifying dreams, the old lady appearing in all of them. In addition to these nightmares, Manus claimed that he began to see indistinct, shadowy figures lurking about his home. Visiting guests reported the same. Eventually, having enough and becoming too spooked to keep it anymore, he decided to sell it on eBay, along with a full account as to how it came into his possession, as well as its history and all of the ominous phenomena associated with it. He would say in part of the description of the box, "I would destroy this thing in a second, except I really don't have any understanding of what I may or may not be dealing with. I'm afraid, and I do mean afraid, that if I destroy the cabinet, whatever it is that seems to have come with the cabinet may just stay here with me. I've been told that there are people who shop on eBay that understand these kinds of things and specifically look for these kinds of items. If you are one of these people, please, please, please buy this cabinet and do whatever you do with a thing like this. Help me." None of this deterred a buyer named Nietsky from purchasing it in 2003 for $140. His winning bid earned him the box, its creepy contents, and apparently the evil spirit inhabiting it as well. Almost immediately after buying the cabinet, Nietsky was plagued by all manner of strangeness. Electronics in his house would malfunction or simply cease to work. Lights would turn on and off by themselves. Objects would be misplaced or moved around even when no one else was there. Strange smells would appear and disappear abruptly, and blurry spectral figures roamed about. His hair even began to fall out, and to top it all off, insect infestation in his home that came from seemingly nowhere. This was enough to convince him to put the box back up for sale on eBay, after which it was purchased by a university museum curator and collector of religious paraphernalia named Jason Haxton of Kirksville, Missouri. Haxton, shortly after acquiring the box, began to have a myriad of health problems himself. inexplicable welts appearing all over his body, rashes, hives, constant coughing fits, fatigue, a metallic taste in his mouth, persistent nasal problems, and even coughing up blood for no discernible reason. His home had frequent phantom scents of things such as jasmine and cat urine. Intrigued by all of these phenomena, Haxton then had it looked at by a specialist on Jewish artifacts named Rebecca Edery, who determined it to be a sacred relic for imprisoning a spirit. She describes the box like so. The two doors on the outside open up just like the Holy Closet, or Aaron HaKodesh, a receptacle for Torah scrolls. And I saw round metal hoops on the inside of the doors that would hold these scrolls. This particular size is used when going to comfort the family of the deceased. The insertion of the spirit was done deliberately for a specific purpose. Being the caretaker of the Dybbuk Box for several years, Haxton experienced a range of thoughts and feelings about it and its effects. Each caretaker who has passed the Dybbuk Box on reports both relief and loss. All regret losing control of it. Haxton had Jewish rabbis and mystics perform rituals on the box to seal in its malicious spirit, after which he then sealed it with an acacia wood ark lined in 24-karat gold, and he hid it away in a secret location, reportedly, indeed, calming its strange effects. The Dybbuk Box has gone on to become somewhat of a phenomena itself since it was first listed along with its eerie story on eBay. It's become the subject of numerous articles, books, television shows, and even large Hollywood productions. It has been the subject of countless internet forums and comments, and even birthed the movement of YouTubers performing dark web challenges in which they film themselves opening an alleged Dybbuk box of their own, exploring its secret contents, experiencing similar strange phenomena, much like Kevin Manis, Nitsky, and Jason Haxton. Is this just an old wine box wrapped in a tall tale, or an actual haunted or cursed artifact? Is there an ancient spirit inside, trapped there long ago, begging to be released again? Why was this spirit trapped there in the first place? What sort of evil might it have performed when it was a living being? The answer eludes us. And truly, it seems the only way to really know for sure is to open the box yourself.
Shalom, friends, and welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, early Jewish mysticism, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown. Let me ask you a quick question. Did we just become Jewish?
Oh, 100%. Should we try to do some of those greetings we looked at earlier?
No.
Very disrespectful.
Extremely. Well, here we are, man. The very first week of our October Spooktacular. And I gotta be honest with you, man, this is a heck of a way to kick it off.
Yeah, it sure is. It really, there's definitely like a sort of real feeling to this, you know?
Yeah, man. I mean, I kind of like glazed over it just now in the time capsule that you just heard, listener. But there's a movie that is kind of based on this topic that both Tyler and I watched. And there's something that I need to explain to everybody. Look, I'm a fan of like scary movies.
I thought you were going to say
But there's like a certain part of it Like there's a certain like sort of subgenre that I basically avoid like the plague.
Mm-hmm.
And that is like anything that is sort of like this like spiritual possession type, those movies.
You and my wife both.
Man, I don't, because there's just like, it's the most realistic to me and it's the scariest. You know, like I think I've said this before on the show, like whether it's Jason, well, maybe not Freddy necessarily, but like a lot of these scary movies, I feel like, hey, if something crazy is happening, I can at least just run away from it.
Just run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In this instance, I don't really know a whole lot of Jewish rabbis that can help me get rid of a Dybbuk, but
and not just Jewish rabbi, but like a learned first century Jewish rabbi type guy who creates golems in his spare time.
right. And so, I mean, I think one of the things that really kind of, I don't know, sparked my interest in this topic is I think so often when we think of anything or anyone sort of being possessed, you for me anyway, you immediately think of
Catholic.
Catholicism, the movie The Exorcist, whatever it is. Because of my own ignorance, I don't know I didn't know almost anything about this sort of ancient Judaism and all these the incredible folklore and stuff that I mean is extremely ancient. It's just fascinating to learn about.
Yeah, I'd heard of this years and years ago, and I want to say it was on Darkness Radio for any of you fans out there. I don't even know if it's still around, but it was a podcast that was, well, technically it was a show on the radio, and then it was converted and placed on like podcast catchers and stuff. But I remember them talking about it, and at the time, even then, it was very much like they kept putting out disclaimers of like, hey, you know, there's all these stories of even if you're just talking about it, you don't even have to have it. Even if you are kind of getting into the topic, beware, because there's things, you know, a lot of people do experience things. And so it kind of blew me away, and I'd totally forgotten about it because it was kind of big there for a while. I guess probably around the time of like the possession or a few years before. But yeah, man, like it just kind of popped into my head recently when we were planning shows, you know, some other stuff that we have cooking for Halloween season. And yeah, we were going to kind of add it with like another little batch of things, but I mean, it really does kind of deserve its own episode.
For sure. And the movie Tyler's talking about that we kind of glazed through earlier is a movie called The Possession, which came out in 2012. And I don't know, again, if it's because of my, you know, lack of having watched movies like this almost since the first time I saw The Exorcist. I thought it was awesome, man. I thought it was really, really well done.
Me too.
It scared the crap out of me. It's, you know, PG-13. But the funny thing about that, like, sort of PG-13 rating is, oh, you know, I thought, well, it's not going to get like too crazy. Maybe, you know, maybe my wife can watch it with me. No, I'm glad.
That's crazy.
I'm glad that she didn't. And it's always that like weird sort of like weird body movement stuff that happens in these movies, or like, boy, if you have not seen this movie, it is a great one for the Halloween season. It's extremely spooky, I thought. And
I loved it.
It kind of does cover loosely the basics of sort of what you just heard in terms of some of the things that happened to the folks that, you know, had possession of this original sort of Dybbuk box. I think before we go into this box any further and kind of give some updates about it, I think we need to kind of explain what a Dybbuk is.
Yeah.
Okay. So according to ancient Jewish lore, the Dybbuk is basically, it's a malevolent wandering spirit that enters and possesses the body of a living person until it's, you know, exorcised. And apparently it can happen because of a number of different reasons. Sometimes the departed soul is like a sinister one and the living person is innocent. Or conversely, the departed soul might have been saintly but wronged by the living in some way. And then in this case, for example, the possession is essentially like punishment or revenge for an improper act, which, you know, isn't too far from a lot of the folklore stuff that we know of in terms of like spirits haunting or like kind of just being around a specific location, right?
Or if you're a fan of James O'Barr's The Crow,
right?
That's basically what he is.
Exactly. Yep. True. But it's interesting because you go back and you look at even like an ancient picture of an ancient sort of depiction or drawing of a Dybbuk. And man, it's pretty incredible. It's just like there's these old drawings of this guy, and he's just imagine this guy that's just carrying the weight of another person on its back, but it's like this skeleton looking thing. It's
what I found too was that, which I didn't know that there were sort of good. I didn't necessarily read all that. I read that like usually it was sort of a malevolent spirit that it would kind of take, sort of what was the Denzel Washington movie where it would like touch another human and
Training Day.
You motherfuckers will be playing basketball in Pelican Bay when I get finished with you.
It would pass this demon into that body. It was able to kind of jump around. No, but I thought it was cool that it basically can just sort of inhabit it. It just basically needs a vessel. So I guess in the Jewish traditions, I don't know how to pronounce this, I'm going to butcher it, but like Gaihanna is sort of, there's a lot more to this, but basically when you die, the life in the body sort of slowly leaves the body in these sort of stages. But basically once your spirit is completely kind of taken out, you're met at the gates of Gaihanna. Again, I'm probably not saying the right word, but if you're basically kicked out, then you're just sort of forced to roam the earth as a wandering spirit. But in that, you have no sort of corporeal body, so you're able to sort of inhabit these things. And I think the priest they were able to kind of put them in these like containers, like boxes and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, so before we get there, I think also this is a great time for us to say, friends who are Jewish, please forgive us for the mispronunciation of any words or anything like that. Don't be offended. It's we're not the best at pronunciation, apparently.
Never have been.
So in my sort of research about Dybbuks in general, what I kind of found was that in the past, they were more frequent, right? And just like a lot, in Christianity, we're all used to having heard about like, the witch trials and that kind of thing. And a lot of those folks potentially being folks that had some sort of mental illness or stuff like that. The same kind of thing would happen in this case, but in a way less sinister. Most of the time it would just involve, and we'll get to like how to get rid of the Dybbuk. Dude, I did find like these old examples of Dybbuk possession dating back into the 16th century.
Whoa.
And even like this one that is just like extremely freaky, dude, that happened around the 18th century in Poland. Okay, by the way, typically the people that were possessed by the Dybbuk were either female or young children.
Which again, man, straight up the exact same sort of parameters for poltergeist.
Right. There's something about those, either a young lady or a young child, or like a woman or a child that is somehow more
like susceptible.
Yeah, susceptible, for some of these things to kind of get in there. But anyway, okay, listen to this account, dude. It's 18th century Poland. A Jewish woman was possessed by this Dybbuk that all of a sudden this girl starts from her throat speaking in Polish, which was not her first language. And it was causing her like extreme physical pain. It wouldn't allow her to, she like tried to pray. It wouldn't allow it. It would like, her body would like bend to where it wouldn't let her pray or like speak the words of the sacred texts and stuff in Hebrew. She would try to go to the synagogue and it would like, again, something would happen to her body. I'm not saying it would like morph or anything. It didn't say anything like that, but it wouldn't physically allow her to get inside.
Which that's kind of a classic sort of exorcism looking. It's like they'll like contort the body to like, control it and to like cause sort of physical pain.
During the exorcism, they heard a disembodied third voice. Not this woman's, not the Dybbuks, but a third voice, okay?
You hear that, Tim Marashenko?
Witnesses around recognized the voice as a famous rabbi who had died a couple of years previously. So all of a sudden they're hearing this voice. The voice of the rabbi basically said that this young lady would be healed. She was saintly, she wasn't evil, and that she would get better and would eventually bear a son, which all of those things happened. I read a couple other like accounts, same kind of deal, man, where it's like a young girl who ends up speaking in a voice that everybody recognizes it to be completely different. It's, either in another language that she never knew. In that last example, Polish was not her first language. In all these other ones, it would be like completely different language, and they're just like, what's going on? So I kind of looked into it a little bit further on like what is it?
Which again, that's kind of like a demon possession type thing, where they suddenly they have complete command over like multiple languages, and it's like whatever this thing is that's like inhabited these people or like sort of beyond they don't have to sort of abide by the rules that, well, I don't know a language. It's like they just kind of know all of it,
Some of the common criteria in all these cases are that like the Dybbuk, like I said before, typically inhabits a female. The Dybbuk itself is generally a male. Again, the quality of the victim's voice is changed, either strange or high-pitched or even another language. Speech sometimes may not even be accompanied by movements of the mouth or tongue.
Wow.
Knowledge of events that were very unlikely to be accessible to the victim, where they have like this knowledge of events that they wouldn't know about. Also, dude, and this is maybe the scariest one, which I thought did a pretty good job depicting in the movie, The Possession, a mobile bulge anywhere in the victim's body. Do you know what I'm saying though, man? Like a weird bulge is like moving around the person's body.
Yeah, that was a really cool scene.
Yeah.
We're going to keep talking about this movie until you guys go see it.
Exactly.
So, wow, that's crazy. I mean, so wait a minute. I got a question. Yeah. You kind of clearly see the similarities between like demonic possession, or at least your sort of stereotypical demonic possession, and the Dybbuk type inhabitation of a body. But basically the difference is I guess like, well, I think there's probably similarities, but so supposedly the difference is demonic possession, clearly it's a demon, and then this is just sort of this, like basically a ghost, like a wandering, bodiless spirit, right? Because I'm wondering now if...
Basically what I found in this like paper written for like this Jewish history study, it doesn't necessarily, just because it's a Dybbuk doesn't mean that it's evil necessarily,
right.
But for whatever reason, this soul of a deceased person has entered another person prior to being like judged in heaven. Okay.
Right. Yep.
And
but do you ever see situations where where the Dybbuk is actually like a positive figure in there?
No. The only reason is like maybe they led a good life. They were murdered. Then they come
Still
back
pissed
and
off.
possess the murderer or something like that. You know what I'm saying? To take revenge.
Oh,
so
I
it's not
see.
necessarily that it is a demon, so to speak. But it is I would maybe call it an unholy possession for sure. I mean, it's certainly somebody that's evil. So, I mean.
So it'd be like if Eric Draven, instead of coming back as the Crow, he just came back and inhabited.
The little skater girl.
No. He would inhabit
the time.
The body of T-Bird or
like
Fun Boy
Ernie Hudson.
No, those are all good guys.
I know, dude. I just wanted to, like if he, if he just like inhabited them and just waited until they're like, fire it up, and then
that's cool. So maybe we're looking at maybe we're looking at this backwards. Maybe all of these things that we keep seeing as like, you're like The Exorcist and like the exorcism of Emily Rose and stuff. Like all these things, maybe they're not even demons at all. Maybe they are just these Dybbuks.
Yeah. Or just like, and then, in the Jewish lore, the Dybbuk isn't the only type of possession possibility, really.
Let's go down that road.
So, but before we do, let's understand why this.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
The thing that kind of got us turned on to this topic was just the Dybbuk Box in general. The fact that it's this like phenomenon now, and it is, extremely strange. There are television shows. The guy, the last guy that had it, Jason Haxton, that we talked about, for the longest time would not give it up. He didn't want to necessarily get rid of it. I think was probably like a little worried that he would regret it, kind of thing. He had tons of experts kind of review it. Mm-hmm. Eventually, though, he donated it to Zach Baggins, the host of the show Deadly Possessions. Mm-hmm. I think there's an episode about it on there.
Which he's the guy from, I think is it Ghost Adventures? I never used to watch that show, but he's like the "come at me, bro."
Oh, okay, I haven't seen it, and I didn't watch it for this episode's research or anything. But apparently, he's the one that has it now. Mm-hmm. But as we were kind of uncovering, what exactly is a Dybbuk and all the lore behind it, I kind of started finding that there's other different types of. Well, there's just all kind of like mythic narratives that kind of go way, way back. And some of it is like from the Kabbalah. Some of it is from just
the Torah,
the Talmud, and, the way that they describe certain things. And so aside from the Dybbuk, there is something called I'm going to call it the Iber, and it's Ibbur. So Iber. They are a soul that visits a person during the sleep, sometimes bringing messages from beyond or prophecies about the future, or it might even haunt a place, as in a lot of our popular ghost stories. Sometimes this soul of a departed righteous person may impregnate the soul of a living person. Unlike the Dybbuk, though, the Iber is usually positive, not negative. Sometimes a righteous soul undergoes the Iber so it can complete a task or perform a mitzvah. So a mitzvah is a good deed done from a religious duty or a precept or a commandment. Sometimes it does it possesses the righteous person for the good of the host's soul. So really, the Iber is not a whole lot different from being possessed by the Dybbuk, except for they're polar opposites, really. The Iber being more benign and the Dybbuk being more sinister. But I just thought that was extremely
So that's what I was asking. Yeah. It's like, so there is like a positive sort of version. Yeah. Interesting.
In both of these cases, again, it's this life energy that's being diverted for either like positive or negative reasons. Life energy in itself is extremely powerful. I read a lot about how like the early Jewish texts and stuff talks about how like the power for creation is one of the most important processes in the material world. I mean, after all, that's what God does, right? He creates the world, brings it into being. And it's pretty cool because they liken it to like, the one power we have as humans that especially back in the day, but truly, to be honest with you, I still feel the same way. That's very sort of cosmic and almost like a superpower is that we can, and if you're, I don't know if this is a safer word, but we can create life as well. Okay? This is not going to be the birds and the bees right now, but
you are not the father.
Our ability to participate in like a divine process of creation. So they kind of talk about that, and the Talmud relates a tale of rabbis who grew hungry while on a journey, and so they created a calf out of earth and ate it for dinner. It's almost like this. Well, that might be disrespectful. I was going to say like this sort of
kind of like allegory.
Yeah.
How Christ, or not Christ, but God created us.
Yeah. Well, in this though specifically, it does talk about how like just as God speaks and creates in Genesis, so too can the mystic. And in fact, the word, this is incredible, dude. I had no idea about this. The word abracadabra is derived from the word avracadabra, which is Aramaic for I create as I speak.
Yep, exactly. It's what we talked about in the other episode, which is a fascinating, it's always been fascinating to both of us, is the idea that like it says in the Bible, basically the sound of the word is this sort of power or energy that sort of fuels a certain way of like like creation, really, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably a much more elegant way of saying that, but like God having the ability to just speak things into existence. And I think I know where you're going here.
Yeah, the Kabbalists basically determined that the rabbis did this just incredible act. You can call it magical if you want, whatever, by language and utilizing the formulas set forth in the Book of Creation or whatever. And under the rarest of circumstances, basically showing that a human being may have the ability to imbue lifeless matter. Yeah, and so this moves into what also is extremely fascinating. And truthfully, I kind of like stepped back from this so that you can, I feel like you're probably going to know a ton about this, but this is essentially when they start talking about creating what is called a golem. And it's almost being like an alchemical process. Tales of mystical rabbis creating life from dust abounded, particularly in the early modern period, which, I mean, truly probably inspired tales such as like Frankenstein and The Sorcerer's Apprentice and, stuff like that.
Yeah, so basically a golem is like a creature or an entity, maybe, if you will, that's typically would be formed out of dust or mud or earth. Again, similar to how God would have created people back in the day. But the golem is basically brought to life by doing these sort of incantations or sort of a ritual. And they would, I think the whole kind of deal is they would basically carve, I guess, technically with their fingers into this soft clay, scriptural stuff or these like sort of early first century Hebrew like phrases. And if you want to lean into like the magical side, it would be kind of an incantation kind of thing, but there's sort of a gray area of like, well, what's magic and what's, if it's chosen or delivered by God, is it good and not magic? Or, so there's all this kind of a little bit of, not conflict, what am I trying to say? Like, there's a little bit of back and forth between that. Because I think in the Torah, they talk about being able to create these calves just in time for this meal that they basically made steaks out of. And some people view that as like a magic thing, and then other people view it as like, oh, well, no, it's a divine thing because it was of God, for the Jewish community or whatever. But basically, a rabbi or a holy man would bring to life these golems. They would basically create them to be like a helper or some sort of companion. It says here, a rescuer of an imperiled Jewish community.
Yeah, I kind of read that like when it all started, the Tales of the Golem basically being created to save, a Jewish community from persecution or death and having some sort of like heroic revenge that, the powerless persecuted Jews didn't have. And so like the folk tales about them kind of started out good, but then things kind of go awry and often end up kind of like having some tragic sort of result.
Yeah, which this is, this is where like I love this kind of stuff because to me, like, in this research, looking into golems and stuff, it immediately made me think, well, should I get into this?
Yeah, we'll get there. And really, like if you kind of think about it, sort of being a source of inspiration, we'll say, for something like Frankenstein. You like, especially in that.
That's great. Yeah,
because it's like you've got this like creature that was created. The intentions were good. Hey, we need this. We need somebody to come and save us. So this rabbi, creates this golem using this old power, this ancient old world power, right? And then the golem eventually kind of grows fearsome, violent,
right? And
then the rabbi is forced to destroy it, which is, man, it's pretty tragic, right?
But also everything falls into entropy. Everything, kind of like Frankenstein,
Yep.
You can only be like this subservient robot for so long until they start getting their own, personality and wants and needs.
Yeah,
leading you, wanting you, needing you.
Watching you. Like this brutish creature whose powers are too easily turned into destructive ends, It perfectly sort of like, in a way, kind of encapsulates that same sort of like anxiety we all have about ghosts, demons, Dybbuks, the fact that like this power of life, so to speak, this life force power is so strong that it brings both promise and terror. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And there's that sort of inescapability of it. That's probably the most sort of scary, with the Dybbuk and anything that's just sort of, whether it's this man-made kind of take on it with like the Golem or the Dybbuk, it's like, I think you were sort of alluding to earlier, is like, with the Freddy Krueger thing, it's like you can't, it's like, where are you going to go? Like a spirit, you can't really get away from that,
Right. And I think that's part of the reason why, I mean, those things, there's just this eeriness and this like terrifying quality to like those kind of stories that, I don't know, man. Like there's something that I truly believe that like a lot, because as you kind of dive further, and I encourage people to do so, as you dive further into this old, quote unquote, old world Jewish folklore and stuff, a lot of that has kind of over time kind of gone away.
Right. Yeah.
And it occurs less and less. And, I don't know. To me, it's like a lot of those old sort of beliefs and almost even quote unquote powers, if you will, have been long forgotten. Those traditions, that's what I was looking for, have been long forgotten.
Oh, especially, I mean, again, this is like ancient stuff. Although I am looking now, this is pretty fascinating. The word golem occurs in the Bible in Psalm 139:16, which uses the word golmi, which translates to my golem. That means my light form or raw material, connoting the unfinished human being before God's eyes.
Man.
That's amazing.
It's kind of like, I feel like the older generation, and I'm talking like older generation, like folks like my wife's grandma who passed away last year, who was like 104 or whatever.
Wow.
I mean, they had stories that their parents told them that, you know what I mean? Like folklore that was passed as an oral tradition that may not have made it to us,
Yeah.
And so when things like this, when I see movies like this, when I read stories like this, it's just, man, it holds another level of sort of like terror and real that like it's just super hard to explain. And, so I digging more into this Dybbuk box that kind of hit the scene in early eBay history. And again, this is what I love about it being so like, so 2003, this is something that would be listed. Of course, this is something that would be on eBay,
Which also, when you say 2003, I feel like that was last year.
Yeah, no. But it's almost been 20 years, which is disgusting.
It sure is.
I mean, first, like this guy's product description might be the scariest thing I've ever seen. I mean, I don't know. Usually it's like, hey, this VHS tape does not have mold.
Yeah.
But I gotta kind of update the listeners here. Well, first, it's important to know this: the person that had it, Jason Haxton, probably the longest. The guy that he's the director of the Museum of Osteopathic Medicine in Kirksville, Missouri. He studied American antiques and ancient artifacts for decades and decades. Obviously, this kind of box, this kind of artifact, this antique, is just something that's right up his alley, right? So he wrote a book about the box in like 2011, I think. And then in 2012, of course, the movie The Possession, which was produced by Sam Raimi. And again, this is another time that we're going to plug it. Hey, I think you should watch. I just, I kind of get nervous though, because I don't really watch these kind of movies all the time. And maybe in comparison to all the other different possession movies.
Oh, I thought it was awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
and also it's like, it's kind of a rarity. You don't really see,
dude, I feel like
many
these
sort of
things are a dime a dozen.
No. I'm saying like ancient Jewish. I mean, that's kind of a,
I think so.
rarity, I think.
Some cool things that cool. Some strange things that happened when the movie was being made during production. Just weird stuff would happen on set. The director described sort of like this. He was standing underneath this unlit neon light, and it just randomly exploded.
Wow.
5 days after shooting wrapped for the movie, all the props from the film, listen to this, man. This is nuts. All of the props from the film were destroyed in a mysterious fire.
Wow.
And then, like, fast forward now, like I said before, the box is has been obtained by Zach Baggins, the host of the Travel Channel show Ghost Adventures. Plenty of spin-offs.
His museum, because he has it like in his whole museum.
It's in his museum or whatever. On an episode of one of this guy's shows, he opens the box on the episode. Apparently, you can hear it say Kevin, I guess maybe referencing Kevin Manis, the first guy, and also this evil child's voice. The show captured on camera what Baggins and his crew claimed was a figure that manifested inside of the box. Some other sort of pop culture relatable thing is on that episode, Post Malone, who I guess is one of Baggins' friends, basically was touching the shoulder of Baggins. Didn't even touch the box, but felt these like bad vibes. A few months after that, dude, his private plane, Post Malone's private plane, was forced to make an emergency landing. His San Fernando Valley home was broken into, and he was involved in a car accident. Now, he talks about this on Seth Meyers' late night show, and I mean, truly, like 100% believes it with every bit of his, resolve. What I kind of found out later, though, there's been a lot of skeptics about this thing because apparently Kevin Manis, at the time when he listed this thing on eBay, he's like a creative writer, essentially. I found this article where the author essentially reached out to Manis because Manis, over almost 20 years now, has really kind of just been quiet about it, refusing to answer emails, won't talk to reporters about it. In 2019, there's a column in a magazine by a guy named Kenny Biddle who basically goes on to dismiss the haunted cabinet as a hoax. As proof, he posts this screenshot of a Facebook post from Kevin Manis that's dated October 2015. And it says, "I am the original creator of the story of the Dybbuk Box, which appeared as one of my eBay posts back in 2003. The idea that Dybbuk boxes have some kind of history prior to my story, and the idea that a Dybbuk box could contain anything other than a Dybbuk, along with any deviation to the type of contents I created to be found inside of a Dybbuk box, is laughable at best." Run-on sentence. How about this? If you or anyone else can find any reference to Dybbuk Box anywhere in history prior to my eBay post, I'll pay you $100,000 and tattoo your name on my forehead. So he's basically saying, look, I created it. There's no such thing as a quote-unquote Dybbuk box anywhere in history. He says that there were only 10 authentic original Dybbuk boxes created ever. The term Dybbuk box was never used or known prior to 2001. He was the original owner. He says, you may contact me and ask any questions you might have, answers about Dybbuk boxes, my experience with them, or anything related from anyone else are probably a bunch of crap.
Which I will say, like, I remember looking this up on the internet when I first heard about it 12 years ago or something. And this was the story that you would continually see, like only this story of Kevin and whoever the next few guys were or whatever. But now, looking into the episodes, you go on and it's just like, it's almost hard to find that stuff because now it's like all these, they're all being sold on the dark web and like video after video of all these YouTubers. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. And so basically this reporter kind of like reached out to him. And when Manis kind of gets on the phone line or whatever, he quickly tells this guy, look, there's no such thing as a Dybbuk box in Jewish folklore, and explains the meaning of the word Dybbuk. He says that it's kind of an oxymoron because Dybbuks don't live in boxes. They live in people, essentially. So this reporter kind of asks like, okay, so the whole thing was made up, the whole backstory of it coming from a Holocaust survivor. And this is when it kind of gets a little weird, dude, because that's when this Kevin Manis character kind of backtracks a little. He's like, no, I'm not saying that. He says that the box did, in fact, come from a Holocaust survivor who somehow imbued the wine cabinet with supernatural powers, and that her granddaughter used that term when he bought it from her in 2001. So essentially, he's backtracking. Things get sort of muddy. So then the reporter kind of like contacts the next major owner, which is Kevin Haxton. And Haxton is just like, look, man, I don't know what this guy's talking about it. I mean, I've had experts look at it. something's going on here. Regardless of whether he made it or not, it really doesn't even matter. It had to start somewhere, but something is there, and it's bigger than Kevin.
Well, in sort of researching this, I saw the article, and of course, it's sort of clickbaity of like, oh, the Dybbuk Box is a fake. But I found a show on YouTube called like the Skeptic Toolbar or something, where they actually interview him, and the host of the show is like, okay, well, tell us about it. And he kind of goes through the whole story, I guess, if you will, talks about where he got it, talks about what happened, talks about all these accidents, this guy that worked for him, his brother, died, killed himself. The like a week later, he kills himself. The whole deal with like his mom, him getting her that as a gift and then stepping out and then coming back to find out that she had had a stroke literally while being in the presence of the Dybbuk Box. And so he's kind of setting it up as like, I'm thinking that he's going to say, hey, I made the whole thing up. I mean, he is saying that. But then once he goes into it, then the host is like, okay, well, so what was made up and what wasn't? He's like, well, I mean, yeah, the thing with my mom, I mean, that all happened. And, she had a stroke. This, when I stepped away and gave it to her and no longer could use her arms, no longer could speak, and begged to get it out of the house. He's like, no, that's real. And then he's like, well, what about, this and this and this? And he kind of goes down all the stuff and he's like, no, that all that stuff's real too. I don't know that it has anything to do with the box itself. And it's just like, what are you doing, dude? It almost kind of felt like it's like he wanted to say like, hey, I came up with it. But once you kind of break it down, it's like all the stuff that he quote unquote made up is all stuff that he's like, no, I mean, that actually really happened. It's just like little things here and there that he was like, no, that didn't happen. But it's silly stuff that doesn't really, make that big of a difference.
Right.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I read further that he admits that he even added like new elements to the Dybbuk story over the years to help like evolve it and keep it relevant and interesting. And whenever he was on Ghost Adventures Quarantine, Manus told another part of this ongoing ghost story that he had given Baggins a second smaller Dybbuk box on the show and said there was a total of 10 that were hidden around the globe. Yeah, explained that basically these folks had summoned an evil spirit to help the Jews fight against the Nazis during the Holocaust, but they couldn't control it. The same spirit caused some of the 20th century's greatest disasters, including the Korean War. And knowing that...
So that's like the Golem, basically.
Kind of, yeah. But not really like a physical, like, one, yeah. And eventually, knowing that they had kind of done wrong, they captured the Dybbuk and separated it into 10 different boxes. And if those boxes were ever brought together, evil would be unleashed, the likes of which the world has never seen.
See, that feels...
Yeah, exactly. And so...
That's definitely him embellishing.
Yeah. Right. What's interesting, though, is this is when you and I, like our conversation about it, although all of this stuff is extremely interesting and extremely spooky and scary and all this, it kind of like starts to get back to our episode that we did about Andrew W.K. And the Codex before that and all this, where it's almost like equally interesting to me that if this guy truly invented this whole story, it's taken on this like life of its own, man.
Yeah. It's almost like a placebo kind of thing. And I'll get into sort of the other aspects, but I think it's interesting to say, okay, so if everything happened exactly like it was supposed to, the first dude made up everything, every single bit of it, even though I just saw a show where he said he didn't. But say every bit of that is all fake and all completely made up. Well, the next, I guess, 2 people that bought the box, hypothetically, if they thought that it was the real thing, then it was just as powerful as if it were, a wandering spirit, because they still had all this like crazy stuff happen. So it's like, does that make it any less sort of like potent or like powerful,
Right. And the fact that like all of those things did like, I don't know. I mean, coincidence? I don't know. Made up? I don't know. It does go back to that thing that we talked about earlier in the episode when we're talking about creation from speaking something into existence, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that I love. Like, I'm a huge fan of, there's this concept, I guess they could be called thought forms or tulpas. If you listen to paranormal podcasts, that was kind of a fairly big thing several years back. But basically a tulpa is this idea that is derived from, I can't remember the word, but it's like this, it's derived from like Tibet and these sort of ascended masters, these, Tibetan monks having the ability to basically create these thought forms. Like they were able to sort of harness or manipulate themselves, having so much belief in something that they were able to sort of create it. So basically kind of like a golem or even sort of a Dybbuk. It's just this sort of idea that you can create this being or object through spiritual or like mental powers, I guess, which is kind of amazing. And it's also, you can go into so many different areas. You can go into our little kids doing this, but maybe on a subconscious level whenever they're creating imaginary friends. But the concept of like the tulpa is sort of linked back, I think, to, there's a woman named like Annie Besant, and apparently she was sort of a theosophist, which, again, leads back to Helena Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley, which, again, is, we just talked about on Andrew WK episode. But I think she basically went to live with the monks for a while. And I guess she sort of had made friends, and they sort of taught her or sort of helped her go through this process of creating a tulpa. And, she put all of her thoughts into it. She imagined like what he would look like, the way he would walk, the way, it's kind of creating out of your imagination something. And I kind of want to do a full episode on this at a later date because it's pretty fascinating. But basically, it kind of worked. And at first she started seeing something out of the corner of her eye, like a little, like somebody in the corner of her eye. She would look, it'd be gone. It, kind of started off small. And then again, the more she kind of put thought into it and was kind of becoming sort of obsessed with this, she started seeing this like jolly, kind of like chubby monk, this, bald robed monk. She would kind of see him off in the distance or see him whatever. And then eventually, I think it scared her maybe, and she didn't want to have anything to do with it. And apparently, like, that's part of the deal. Is like whenever you create these things, you have to also sort of destroy them in a way. And I can't remember exactly how all that works, but she didn't really do that. And so she said that she started seeing this sort of transformation between this like happy, jolly, kind of like jovial, funny monk. He started getting like skinnier and skinnier and like darker and like more sort of malevolent and negative feelings were associated with him. And then she would start to see him like in the middle of the night, like in the corner of her room and, stuff like that. So it's kind of like, it's like once we kind of got into this, the idea of that, if this is a situation where the Dybbuk was completely made up by him, I think, creating this eBay description that's, just putting just enough out there to make it really scary and, place it in like an ancient, Jewish tradition, makes it even a little more sort of like foreign and kind of like creepy or whatever. Even the things that were in the box, it's like, like two little bundles of hair tied with like a, hair tie with, one was white, one was brown or black or whatever. And then, these sort of obscure, like a, wilted rose petal or whatever, like all these kind of things, whatever happened, like if none of that was a real thing, I truly think like an actual sort of thought form or a tulpa, if you will, started to kind of be built up. And then once you kind of get into like, if you look into this stuff, it's like there's several different things. So basically a tulpa is an entity created by a person, a thought form that has a degree of will and autonomy, but it's basically sort of an imaginary friend that kind of can lead into itself. There's another word and another topic, which again, we'll talk about this in the tulpa episode but it's called egregore. And it's sort of it has sort of Greek origins, and it's referred to as like a number of things, that are kind of created by this sort of mass sort of thought by like multiple people all kind of like focusing and thinking about this one kind of thing. And then a servitor, which to me sounds just like it's sort of like the occult version of. Yeah, exactly. It's kind of the occult version of a golem, really. It's created to serve like a magician, usually created to perform like a task. And to me, that's almost sort of like a golem kind of deal. But, basically what I'm saying is I think whatever it was, I think that however it got enough power to actually sort of start manifesting these things that added up to what he had made up,
And I mean, at the end of the day, if the only result of all of this, if he did make it up, is that we got a pretty darn good scary story.
Oh yeah.
That is enriched with
old
ancient Jewish folklore. Man, I think we kind of come out on top,
Oh yeah. Well, let me say this too. Going back to talking about how, back in the day, 10, 12 years ago, you could type in Dybbuk Box and it would always just point to the one case, the one Dybbuk Box. And then now, you type it in on YouTube or whatever, and like there's hundreds of videos of all these YouTube stars and whatever, and it's like, oh, I bought this off the dark web and I'm going to open it. There's a part of me that thinks it's all silly and it's all ridiculous, which more than likely there's a lot of charlatans out there and there's a lot of fakery. But I will say, like I was talking about, the term egregore, when it goes from being a thought form created by one person having belief in something, maybe it has become an actual egregore, and this sort of fear is obviously brought to a mass, millions and millions and millions of people know about this thing now, and they have that idea in their head that like, oh, this thing's really dangerous. This is an ancient dark entity that's kept in this thing. And, let's get one off the dark web. It'll have to have like a demon or a Dybbuk in it. And so maybe all these boxes are nothing more than like just somebody making them in, some, Chinese factory. And they're just these silly kind of like, replicas. But because there's been like sort of this mass-minded sort of creation of this egregore, maybe it's kind of serving itself,
creating almost like a gateway for these things to actually come into existence. Man, fascinating.
Okay, so if you had to say yay or nay, what do you think this thing is? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's fake? What do you think?
Like I said kind of earlier, man, these ancient sort of old world things I believe existed. I think they still do exist. I think because of, and it kind of reminds me of American Gods,
right?
In a way, to where it's like they're even in American folklore and Native American folklore, there are all these different things in ancient Greece and mythology and Roman mythology and Norse mythology. There's all these different belief systems that existed at some point, right? And over time, they get engulfed or they get enveloped by whatever conquering religion sort of comes in, sweeps in through the area. And a lot of those beliefs, even though I'm sure those people attempted to pass them down, have kind of been lost, right? And because of that...
Or sort of co-opted.
Yeah, co-opted or whatever. But because of that, potentially reducing and or diminishing or even just completely wiping out the power of that quote-unquote deity. I'm just talking about conceptually, that's kind of where I am. And as these things such as this Dybbuk Box or just the fact that it's being talked about again, like in my imagination, I immediately imagine like all these Dybbuks being like, huh?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, oh man, now we can, wait a minute. And it's like, dude, this thing, what's interesting is throughout pop culture, the Dybbuk has kind of appeared dating, I mean, there's a famous like play from 1920. By the way, there's an episode for all you 80s fans out there. There's an episode of The Real Ghostbusters, the cartoon, called Drool the Dog-Faced Goblin, where the Ghostbusters basically, they're facing all these different ghosts, and Egon mentions a Dybbuk.
No.
Yes.
Oh, that's
in
amazing.
another episode later on called "The Devil to Pay." They deal with a demon named Dybbuk.
Wow.
And Dybbuk is later revealed to be a Dybbuk.
Holy cow, that's amazing.
So it's like these things appeared, they exist. I mean, in pop culture, potentially giving power to an ancient, old world entity. And that's kind of what I think is going on. Now, do I think this dude made it up because he's a creative writer? I don't know, man. I don't... Potentially, but that's part of the reason why I like this Sam Raimi movie is it doesn't follow like this dude's story. They kind of took elements of it and put it in there, which...
Now I did think it was cool, and again, if you haven't seen the movie, this is going to make no sense, but I didn't even realize this until I saw this interview, like I'm telling you about on that Skeptics Toolbar or whatever it's called, but the intro with the old lady and the guy, that's basically him and his mom. And then so as it goes on to the next people, it's like we pick up where his story ended.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool way.
That is pretty cool. But like all the artifacts inside of it and stuff, man, you got to watch it. It's super creepy. Now.
Yeah, it's great.
In 5 minutes, tell me what you think it is.
Okay, I got a lot to go into here. I think I think it could be a lot of different things, honestly. I really do believe that there's power in that sort of egregore, tulpa, thought form kind of thing. I think that could be a deal. I think it could be an ancient, first century Jew wandering soul who couldn't get into wherever, and maybe that is a thing.
So disrespectful.
I think that another thing that I did while you were talking just then is this idea that, how we always talk about, I feel like this was sort of the theme of our first season with Passport to Magonia and UFOs being the same thing as fairy abductions and, that kind of thing. And the idea that like we play a role, are we the missing component in projecting how these things look or how they're viewed. And so I think, I don't know, I feel like a lot of that could kind of be in play. I also think, this is another thing that's a topic that is pretty creepy, but a jinn, which is sort of a Middle Eastern thing. It's, pretty heavily believed throughout the Middle East and the Middle Eastern traditions and religions. And it's just this idea that basically God created people, God created angels, God created these other beings called the jinn out of smokeless flame. Which, if you think about it, it could be like plasma or whatever. But basically, there are these other entities that kind of live behind the veil. And there's a lot of sort of, trickster elements of them. There's a lot of, but, again, that was written in.
I just think like it's interesting and somewhat self-centered for us to kind of just only think that we're the only intelligent beings that were created. Now, those are potentially the only ones that we were told about, or at least by the time we got our hands on this ancient book that had many translations and revisions, those things aren't in there. I don't know, man. I've always thought like there's just more to the story that I can't wait to find out.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, all that to say, the jinn were found in 1001 Nights, which is where we get, Aladdin and the word genie and all that. But a lot of sort of elements of the jinn were you were able to sort of place them in items. And so you would find them like in a ring or in like a lamp.
I love the parallel.
I think that there could be something even to do with that. I just think there's a lot of different sort of options that this thing could be. And I don't believe that there's a Dybbuk in every single one of the silly YouTube videos, but I think that it could be an egregore type thing where maybe it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy and all these silly kids on YouTube are actually sort of creating this thing.
Yeah, man.
So
I mean,
we'll have another episode where we talk about thought forms and and tulpas and stuff.
You know, admittedly, I know very little about that, and so I'm excited too.
Mm-hmm. Well, cool, dude. Well,
I mean, what a way to kick off the Halloween season, dude.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm so excited. I love this month, man.
Spooky.
I love the spooky. I love just the weather change, the candy.
God, I thought you were going to say the Weather Channel.
The Weather Channel. I mean, bringing our listeners spooky stories. I love this, man.
Yeah, I know. If I could like extend the month of October into like the span of 2 months.
Yeah. And in a way we kind of do.
Yeah, we kind of do, actually.
I mean, let's be real about it.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, this was an incredibly spooky story. Mm-hmm. And like I said, really ignited more and more that we do the show. I was talking to Ann about this the other day. The more episodes that we do, the more I've come to realize, man, I'm becoming more and more fascinated with like history, you know, ancient folklore. Are we becoming old? Is that the deal?
Oh, yeah. 100%.
I don't know, man. You know, when I was in school, I didn't really care much for history. I mean, it's like, okay, I got to take a history course. Fine.
I got the history award, so I loved it.
I got the history award.
I really did.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you ever wondered what is a way for you to tell that Tyler went to a school of like 10 people.
Give me an attaboy.
They just said, here, and this year's history award goes to Tyler Benz. Like, I got the history award. I don't know, dude. That's
it's like the one kid that didn't fall asleep in class gets the history award.
Yeah, boom, right away. The other kid that makes the like volcano gets the science award.
Science award. Yep.
Susie, who's just like the most athletic person, she gets the sports award.
Yep. Jeremy, who's a little too handsy, gets the biology award. Anyway, if you'd like to find us, you can go to Instagram, where that's the bulk of all of our activity. If you have spooky stories, if you have something you want to talk to us about, if you own your own Dybbuk Box, feel free to shoot us a DM, or if it's more of a long form thing, like I hope that you're going to do when you tell your spooky story and record it to a voice memo, send that on over to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Anything else, Wood?
We say it every week. Thank you so much to every single person that listens to our show. Whether you're new or if you've been here since the beginning, or if you crammed every single episode in a matter of a couple of days like some of our listeners have before.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you so much. It means the world to us. Tyler and I, when we're not recording an episode, literally talk about it all the time. We just can't believe it. We're so grateful for you, so thank you so much. Don't forget, if you're listening to this podcast on Apple, to leave us a review.
Please.
5 stars would be awesome. And that's all I'm going to say about it. 4 stars, I'm going to find you.
Yeah, don't even do it. Also, on that note, like we kind of say a lot around here, please just go tell one friend. If this is your first time listening, you're like, oh my gosh, this is the best podcast I've ever listened to. Hey, pass it on.
Yeah.
Tell your buddy.
Exactly.
Just one friend, that's all it takes.
Yeah, that's your good thing. You know, if that's the one good thing you do today.
There you go. Like we always say, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. man. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of